Okay, and good morning to everyone who has joined me today for our webinar, and welcome back to week 2 of our Real School Shutdown Brunch webinars. And I just want to reflect on last week quickly and just say a massive thank you to everyone who's joined us for all the different webinars that we've been running on a daily basis, and we're going to continue to do that to provide support for you over the next few weeks as well. And a special welcome to anyone who's joined us for the first time today. For what I believe is this important topic, and something for me that when I was in the classroom used to, I guess, one, provoke so much interest, but two, give me some insight and some skills to how I could better manage the students who I used to work with. And that's that all important topic of human behaviour. And I guess when we talk about what today's webinar is going to be all about, I think it's that picture there that tells a million stories, because it is about trying to understand the responses of students and parents who are under strain. And I guess we take today's current situation and the challenges that we are facing, not only, I guess, around learning and what we're doing in terms of schools, but that challenge around how do we best support our families and what are our families actually going to be going to. So hopefully today, my job will be to give you a few tips along the way, increase your chances of success. And I think that's an important thing that, from my point of view, there isn't one simple and easy way when it comes to dealing with human behaviour. But if we can just upskill, add a few tools to our tool belt, then I think that we're going to be better placed when we do either one, return from this weird period of time away from the classroom and into the classroom again, or two, just when we deal with humans generally speaking moving forward. It's not just about the students who walk through our doors, it's actually about the adults as well. So for people who haven't been in a webinar before, or if you haven't been in the Zoom concept of a webinar, if I was just to sort of point you into a few important parts of the webinar, what you'll find somewhere around your screen, there'll be a toolbar there, and on that toolbar there'll be a chat section. Now what I want you to do is use that chat section as an opportunity to ask questions. You'll see a Q&A and a number of other bits and pieces too, but let's focus on the chat section. And if you do use the chat section, I just want to draw your attention to the important part, which is to all panelists and attendees. If you just want it to go to me directly, then just go to all panelists. If you want it to go to everyone so that the entire webinar team can actually view what your question looks like, then please make sure that you tick on all attendees. The other important thing is that at the end of today, you will get a slide deck sent your way. Just for registering, you'll make sure that that slide deck that you're seeing on your screen now will be sent to PDF form over the course of the next 48 hours. So anything else that you may have around the functions of the webinar, please just pop them into the chat, and you'll see that someone from my team will be able to help you. And you've already seen a post there from Adam. Adam will continue to post throughout the webinar with some upcoming opportunities for future webinars that will be rolling out this week. So let's just go back to our home slide. And when we talk about behaviour, what I think we probably need to sometimes do is go, let's take a step back from that word behaviour and maybe put a bit of a line through it and go, when we're talking about behaviour in schools, when we're talking about the way that we want our young people to behave, maybe a better word to use would be conduct. What we often worry about is the behaviour of students without giving what I believe is consideration to the way that we want our kids and our adults to conduct themselves in the school environment. Now, when you break that down, you think about it, when we talk about behaviours, what we're actually talking about there will be the actions that are demonstrated. So if I was to say something like swearing, punching, pushing, they're all the actions, or what we classify as behaviours. But when we talk about conduct, what we're actually talking about is the relationship between the actions and the norms. And what that starts to bring into play is the context in which that has played out. So when we talk about conduct, or when we talk about behaviour, I want to use them sort of transferably today, but wouldn't it be nice if we could get the young people who walk through our doors to conduct themselves in a way that meet our expectations, that's safe, that really provides that supportive learning environment. And why I think that word conduct is so important is because it offsets that problem of, and I'm sure we've all had it, when we've had a young student that's sworn, he's displayed sort of all sorts of inappropriate language, and we've spoken to the parents at home just to alert them of the situation. We've got exactly the same type of response from the parents as well, with a barrage of swearing and other bits and pieces that go with that. So if we can say, when you are in our environment, if you can conduct yourself in this way, that's certainly what we are looking for. Sort of moving myself around here. I guess the other important thing about what we're talking today is it needs to be put into perspective. It is unprecedented times. There is no doubt about that. Think about your own personal situation. Think about the struggles that some families will be going through at the moment. And I think if we were to look in the mirror, we would say that the way that we're actually feeling at the moment is very different to what we've ever felt before. Why I think it's important that we put this into perspective, because some of these skills, some of these tools, some of these strategies that we go through today won't serve us in the immediate future. They won't actually serve us until we get back into that school environment, till we get back to that time when we are operating at full capacity. So what we try to do is to work through that point around understanding the behaviour, but not accepting that people are going to behave in a way that we don't sort of normally see. So it's not about an acceptance that we're going to see poor behaviour, but it's actually about saying, can I get a better understanding? Can I give a little bit more clarity to why that actually happens? So I've got a better way of dealing with that as we move forward. So it is a bit about a balance. Hopefully throughout this morning, I'll give you 3 to 4 little tips that you'll be able to take on board. Some will be able to be applied straight away. It might be through some of the behaviours that you are seeing from your parents or from your students in that online world, or in that, I guess, what we're going to call as a modified school environment. But a lot will be about what we're doing when they return to the schoolyard, or when we return to full capacity, or when we return to that, what we're hopefully getting towards is being a little bit more normal. So let's put everything we can over those two lenses. If we were going to sort of talk a little bit about behaviour, if we were going to ask ourselves, what are the things that we need to consider when we're looking to make sure that we're aware of the way that students behave? What we need to do is we need to understand the part of the body that influences behaviour, and that's the human brain. Now, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time today unpacking the key elements that I think have a significant influence over behaviour. If you are really interested in the stuff about the human brain, later this week, actually on Thursday, we'll be running another webinar, and it's around the brain under strain. And what we'll actually be doing there is going a bit deeper into the way the human brain works and the influence that will have on stress and how people actually feel. But for the sake of today, I just want to give you a quick snapshot or overview of a couple of key parts that I'm going to refer to a bit later on in my presentation. The first one there is the cerebellum. Now, the cerebellum is the part of the brain that's responsible for motor skills. It's the part of the brain that helps us with balance and movement. Now, the best probably example I can give you, it's a little bit like the computer in terms of providing us with the ability to be able to move our hands, to be able to shift parts of our body in a certain way. So it's got a pretty significant role in terms of behaviour. Second thing is around the stem. That's the automatic functioning. It's where we sort of outsource stuff that we don't have to worry about it. Breathing, blinking, a whole range of other little bits and pieces that we don't need to give consideration to, but we know are just happening in the background. The two parts that I will refer to throughout today that do have relevance to the work that we're talking about when we talk about human behaviour. The first one is the neocortex. Now, the neocortex is the part of the brain where we think, the part of the brain where when we're considering, when we're reasoning, when we're talking to people, that we actually have to be able to provide us with the most reasonable way forward. Now, the neocortex is the part of the brain that in humans, it's the largest part of the brain. And the important thing about it is that it's sort of the oldest part of the brain as well. Now, when I talk about the neocortex, I guess the other significant part that sort of works with the neocortex, or against the neocortex rather, is the limbic system. Now, the limbic system is that fourth part of the brain that has relevance to the work that we're going to be talking about today. Now, the limbic system is around feelings and emotions. And I think it'd be fair to say that when we talk about humans and we talk about human behaviour, humans generally aren't great at thinking and feeling at the same time. Generally speaking, we do one more so than we do the other. And that little thing that helps us either think or feel is amygdala. And amygdala is a little bit like the traffic cop. It's the part of the brain that allows us to switch between the neocortex and the limbic system. Now, when we are in the classroom, because the nature of the environment, when we're in the schoolyard, the nature of all of the different personalities, all the different behaviours that come in, quite often what we need to do is to upskill ourselves to the point where we have words preloaded into our neocortex. And part of the work we're going to do today is about giving ourselves the best chance of being able to think logically and to be able to use the language that we want to use in a way that doesn't allow us to get emotional. Because when we get emotional, like our students that bring those emotions into the class, when we're dealing with some of those behaviours, what actually happens is that we use words that we don't want to use, or we say things that we don't mean to say. So our job is to be able to upload as many words as we can to our neocortex, so that in those moments where we are feeling a little bit limbic, when there are emotions that are running high, we have preset words that we can call on and be able to use to our advantage. Now, the really simple example for me is something along the lines of a behaviour that makes me a little bit limbic. And it might be something just really reasonably low level, something like a student that continually yells out in class. Now, what I want to do is just sort of flag that in the way that saying, if I was just to get into that situation and just deal with it, then what would happen is I'd be using all sorts of words, but I've got these words preloaded into my neocortex, and it's, sorry, I can't speak to people who yell out right now, but I can speak to Sarah, who's got her hand up. So our job is to upload those words to the neocortex, and we'll keep coming back to that. All right, so human behaviour. I think when we put these two pictures up onto the screen, straight away we are going to draw a few little assumptions. You'll start to make some judgments based on the things that you're seeing there. As you can see, you've got your student's head into the toilet, a young person's head in the toilet. And I guess the question is what they're actually doing down there. It could be a whole range of different things. They may be feeling unwell. They may have dropped something in there. Now, you look at the picture on the right, and again, there's some assumptions going to be made straight away. When we go to understanding human behaviour, the important part about what we're talking here is that every behaviour has a meaning and a context. We're just going to unpack that a little bit more. So when I talk about meaning, what I'm actually talking about here is that it serves a purpose in either the short term or the long term. So the behaviour that is presented will have a purpose behind it. And the behaviour that is exhibited will generally fall into three categories: either get, avoid, or achieve. Now, when I'm talking about the meaning being to get something, this is typically when we have a toddler who may be behaving in a certain way, throwing that little tantrum because what they want is a lolly. And what happens is their mum or their dad has said, no, you're not having that lolly. So what do? They behave in a certain way in order to get that lolly or to get what it is that they want to get. So for, I guess, the most relevant situation that I've seen of recent times in terms of the get of the meaning behind the behaviour is what we're seeing happen in the supermarkets at the moment. And really it's around that toilet paper and the way that people are actually behaving to get what it is that they want, what they feel is important, what they feel that their family actually needs. And they're behaving in ways they wouldn't normally behave. So if they want to use this, how can they actually behave in a way that will leverage the end result for them? Second one's avoid. The easy example to sort of unpack there for an avoid is that grade 3 student who throws the little tantrum in order to doing the work that we're wanting them to do at a particular time. That's because it's a whole range of different reasons. But really, when we say it's numeracy after recess and we come in, and what happens is that we know that we're going to get a behaviour escalation from a particular student. The important thing is that we need to go, why are they behaving in that way? What are they avoiding doing here? Is it that they want to avoid to do the work? And then why is it that they do that? So the avoiding of the work is something that is a behaviour behind, and the meaning is that they're trying to get there. The last one is the achieve. And with the achieve, what we're talking about here is a student that behaves in a certain way because they want to actually get something. You know, I guess the typical example of this for me is I had a young boy who I used to work with, and every now and again he'd present with some fairly challenging behaviours. And it came to the point when we were actually looking to nominate for our student leaders. And he was desperate to get this actual position of being student leader. So what happened is his behaviour changed in the short term. He was exceptionally well behaved. He was doing all the right things. He was so helpful. It wasn't really until I understood that the reason he was behaving in this way was because he actually wanted something, he wanted to achieve something, and that was get that recognition as being the student leader. Look, unfortunately, he missed out. And then what we saw after him missing out was a bit of a change in some of those behaviours. So sometimes people will behave in a certain way in order to achieve something. Another sort of example of this that happens outside of the school is people who may battle mental illness, and in particular anorexia. And what they're looking to achieve is a change in their physical body structure. And the way that they actually do that is by behaving in a certain way, by avoiding foods, by making all sorts of decisions that when we would know, looking from the outside in, that maybe it's not the wisest or the smartest thing to do or the healthiest thing to do. But when we're caught in some of these mental illnesses, what actually happens is that we behave in a certain way to achieve an outcome. So when we talk about what it is that we're looking at in terms of the meaning behind the behaviour, what we want to look at is what's the cause of the behaviour? Why is a student behaving this way? Why is an adult behaving this way? Because the important thing is this isn't always just about students. Are they angry? Are they frustrated? Are they bored? Are they excited? So being able to get some clarity on the meaning. The second part around human behaviour, and we talked about every behaviour's got a meaning and a context. The second part is around the context or the environment. So I'm sure we've all had that situation when we've called home on the back of a student behaving in a certain way, and we've been greeted with a parent saying to us, oh, but they don't behave in that way at home. Now, I think what's really important here is that context plays a significant role in understanding why a student behaves in a certain way. So although our kids may not be able to explain what it is when we're talking about context or the environment, they certainly get it. They get the principles behind it, and that's all kids. I need to sort of point out here, and I think Adam's probably sitting in the background going, why has he got a picture of the Richmond Football Club on the background there in the crowd? And I think the important thing about when we talk about human behaviour is that the AFL and crowds at sporting arenas are certainly a good example of this. And today I've picked Adam's as a people behave in certain ways depending on the environment they're in. So when we go to the football and we are amongst other people who behave in a certain way, generally what happens is we feel that we can behave in that same sort of way. It sort of gives us permission to be able to do that. We wouldn't behave in the same way where we're abusing umpires, where we're yelling out, where we're screaming at the opposition, if we were in the school environment or in our work environment. So depending on the nature of the context, actually allows us to be able to behave in a way that we can be either to justify or to understand. Now, I guess the other thing about that context is think about a time when you were growing up, thinking about a time that you were sort of behaving in a way that when you look back on there, you go, oh, gee, I probably shouldn't have done that when I was with my friends, or maybe I regret doing that. Or we do something in a time that we can look back on and we go, oh, I wouldn't have done that, but at the time it was okay to do that. And again, that's because of the environment. I think the other really important thing when we're talking about this is, we make that sort of judgment on people and the behaviours on weekends, or when we're at the football clubs, or when we're at our netball clubs, and then we take that direct comparison and say, well, I wouldn't do that when I was in the workplace. And that's because the environment changes around us. Now, young people are exactly the same. They'll behave in certain ways due to the environment. Just going to quickly grab a drink. Okay, as we just sort of keep moving along, I think the important thing to take out of that slide there is human behaviour, like it is shaped by our culture and by the values that we have been exposed to. And really what I'm saying there is that we do look through the world through our own backyard. So here's our first tip that's going to be coming your way. The first tip is that we've got two choices when we come to understanding behaviour. The first thing is that we can either take the low road, and that low road is that we can just look at the behaviour and we can make some assumptions, we can guess, and we can react to the behaviour that we're actually seeing. Or the high road is that we can take a step back. We can understand, is that key word there for me. We can observe the behaviour that's happening. We can understand, and then we can respond with a strategy, with something that's really clear to us. And I think the important thing about what we're talking about here is that in a moment of challenge that we're faced with in the classroom, sometimes we do take the low road because it's the option that we believe gets us the quick response. But what we need to do is need to go, right, what's actually going on? What's happening behind the behaviour? If we can take that high road, I'm pretty sure that we're going to end up being a little bit more effective with some of the strategies that we will use, and at the same time, a little bit less stressed. So as we move further into understanding human behaviour, I'm going to put it to people that changing and modifying behaviour, it doesn't just happen by accident. It's a deliberate process or a practice. Now, the best example I can give you, and take that picture there on your left of screen, is that nobody accidentally woke up this morning on a diet. what actually happens is that we go through a number of steps. We go through a really clear process before we actually get to the point of changing behavior. So might have been that we're sitting on the couch, we're eating chips, having a beer, whatever else it may be. And then all of a sudden on our screen comes one of those cool ads with the ab roller, the NutriBullet thing, and all we sort of say, 4 easy payments, and then we're away. And what actually happens is we start at that stage to change our behavior. Next day we head to the supermarket, we make some choices around food, and then we start exercising. The important thing when it comes to that example is that only at that point have we started to change our behavior. Now, as adults, well-educated, people who understand themselves and are able to reflect on their own behavior, what actually happens is that we have a relapse. I don't think I've met anyone that started a behavior in the diet when they're 18 and they've been able to stay on that behavior ever since. So if we can apply that to our students, if we can apply that to the classroom, what we need to do is we need to be able to say, right, I'm going to accept that for a behavior to change from this particular student, they're going to need to have a really clear process, a deliberate process, and I need to support them with the change of practice. And the other thing is, I've got to accept that they're probably going to relapse. Again, just really relevant to where we're at the moment. People who are working from home, what we're actually doing is we're modifying our behavior, we're modifying the ways that we've previously been comfortable working, and we need to work a little bit different because we can't expect to work in the same way. So as a result, what will happen is the product or the outcomes might not be exactly the same. And I think this is where a lot of stress is going to lie over the course of the next few weeks to a few months, that what we'll actually start to see is that whole shift towards changing lifestyle and changing work arrangements will actually result in people behaving in different ways around the workplace. A really good example here that I sort of love is around making sure that the first step actually feels good. And I go back to a case study that I was reading not so long ago, and it talks around toothpaste and the flavour of toothpaste. And what actually happened is that we had some significant issues with people actually brushing their teeth. This is even going back, a number of years. And what actually happened is toothpaste companies made a deliberate change to make the toothpaste flavour actually feel fresh and taste good. And the reason they did that is because of that concept of making the first step feel good. And when people felt that was making them feel good, then what actually happened is it started to help them change their behaviour because they were getting direct feedback in a positive way around that type of behaviour shift. So it's important that we make our first step feel good. Right, just keeping an eye there on the chat box. Appreciate Adam and Annette, thank you for that. Just don't want to miss anything if it comes my way, but Adam should be able to handle most questions that are coming there regarding upcoming webinars. So if you've got a question, post it in the box there. He'll be sitting back and able to help you. When we talk about that behaviour change too, I think this is of real importance to us. If you chase two rabbits, both will escape. One of the greatest mistakes that I believe that we make in schools is that when we are presented with challenging behaviour or behaviours, what we often do is we try and address everything at once. Now, I'm not saying that we ignore behaviours. I'm not saying that what we need to do is go, what are the things that are happening here? I just want to focus on one thing. But it is important that we say that we need to focus on one behaviour if we're going to get improvement. One target behaviour is probably what I believe would be a reasonable number to start with. Now, again, I've got to reinforce, it doesn't mean that we ignore the other behaviours, but what we're looking for is greatest points of leverage to be able to get some change and some improvements. And what often happens is if we can get one target behaviour to improve, other things will start to improve along the way as well. So it's important that we don't overcommit ourselves to addressing a whole range of behaviours at any one time. Let's keep it quite narrow and quite sharp in terms of the work that we're doing. All right, priming language. Again, this is moving into tip number 2. So priming language is a behaviour technique. And I've got to say here, males aren't as good as females on this one. We often give the example of priming language as being, I guess, probably language that we use to influence a change in behaviour. And that can be both negative and positive. So when I talk about changing behaviour, what I'm saying is that language is sometimes our easiest starting point. It costs us the least amount of time. It can actually be some of the most influential strategies that we implement, and it really is around the words that we actually use. I've got to give the example here of what's probably shifted in terms of language over a period of time, and that's in places like local parks and gardens. And it's about speaking to what you want to see. So what actually once would present when we go for a walk through gardens, that is what they don't want to see. So don't step on the grass, don't walk over here, don't do this. What's actually happened is a priming technique or a shift in that language is to the positive, and they're actually asking what they want to see. Thank you for staying on the path. And they're thanking and rewarding us for the behaviours that we want to see. And again, I sort of take that back to the classroom. If you were to take a step back from your classroom right now, if you were to have a look at the architecture of your classroom and you were to just listen to some of the words that were getting thrown and used and being able to sort of analyse some of those words that are used around your school, what I'd actually say is that a lot of the words are around stop, don't, and no. What we want to do is we want to say, how can we avoid using those words too often? And how can we talk to the positive? How can we advertise the good things that we want to see? And again, I sort of take this tip, number 2 here, and I apply it to an everyday situation. I think about the supermarket, and we know as humans, we love people watching. For me personally, I absolutely love watching people behave in certain ways in social settings. And one of the great examples I can give is at the supermarket. And that's probably the example when I don't have my kids there with me and I'm standing at the edge of the lollies aisle. And as I'm about to walk down there, what I see is a child standing there with his mother, and they're about to go down the aisle that's got all the lollies. And what I hear from mum are words along the line of, now do not touch the lollies. And as a 3-year-old about to walk down that aisle, what are the words that that particular child can hear? Touch lollies. So what's actually happened is the parent has just primed the child for the behaviour that she wants to see. Now, when we take a step back from this and we apply it to the classroom, again, what we often get caught up in is saying the things that we don't want to see. Don't talk, don't do this, stop doing that. What we could be better off spending our time and our energy towards is rewarding and acknowledging the things that we do want to see. I love the way that Sarah is sitting down and ready to listen. I love the way that Johnny has walked calmly over, grabbed a piece of paper, and has now made a start. So what I'm actually doing is I'm rewarding the behaviours I want to see rather than advertising the crap or the stuff that I don't want to see. I guess another important thing when it comes to priming, and I guess the significance to language, is just that subtle shift between the words of please and thank you. Now, when we use the word please, it's a request. But when we use the word thank you, it's an expectation. So as simple as, I need you to go back to your seat, thanks, rather than could you please go back to your seat. When we use that word, could you please, we're actually there for a request. What we want to do is build an expectation. Go back to your seat, thanks. And we move forward from there. So priming, it's a great technique. And I'm sure that when you do analyse the language that you use, and when you look around your classroom, what you'll see is that there are a number of cues that speak to negative priming. What we want to do is see if we can flip them to the positive. All right, tip number 3 is around labelling the behaviour, not the student. I think what's really important here is quite often we fall into that situation of saying, you're a naughty boy, you're a naughty girl. And again, I come back to not only individuals, but a whole class. And I'm sure we've all had that situation where we've said, oh, you've got us for English, or we're the naughty class. Or when we have a CRT or a relief teacher that heads into the classroom as a replacement for that day, and the opening comments are, we're the loud class, or we're the naughty class. But what actually happens is that when we label students, when we label people, they live up to those labels. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're not labeling the student, but rather we're labeling the behavior. Another really specific thing of what we do here, and we do it quite often, is that we say, oh, you know what, he's a naughty boy. I actually taught his older brother. Or oh, I've seen her sister and the way that she behaves, no wonder he behaves like that. So what happens is that when we create these negative labels, that students will live up to the labels and they will start behaving in that way. And just as it works for the negative, it also can work for the positive. So what we need to do is we need to work from that positive mindset around how do we avoid labeling the student and just going, what's the target behavior that I want to do? And what are the things that they're doing that are great that I can celebrate? This does have a link also to priming language. And another part of that priming language is around concept priming. So concept priming is where people act in line with concepts, categories, or labels. So if we were to start calling people beautiful or rich or old, generally speaking, what they'll do is they will respond and meet those expectations that we place on them due to the language that we use. Now, there was some research conducted on concept priming that focused on the elderly. And what actually happened is they separated two groups out. Now, one group was primed with words expecting them to feel like they were old or in the elderly category. And the second group was quite the opposite. They were talking from a mindset of being quite young and healthy and fit. Now, the outcome was the difference between the two groups is that the first group, the group that was primed with the words around making sure they felt like they were in that elderly category, their walking speed actually slowed down. Their language changed and their mindset was significantly different to the other group. So the language is just that highlight of importance around the type of words that we use will actually result in the behaviours that we want to see. Now, I think it's really important too to acknowledge here that when we talk about behaviours, what we're talking about is giving ourselves the best chance of success. So I'm not saying here that any one of these strategies standalone will fix your day and will fix any of the challenging behaviours that we've got. It's actually not about that. It's increasing our likelihood of success. It's increasing our chance of being able to have a better outcome than previously what we would have been doing if we hadn't been using some of these types of techniques. All right, next I'm going to jump into a little bit of Jo Lang's work. Jo does some amazing stuff and we've drawn some inspiration from her work there. And it's around, it sort of fits really well with this labeling. It's around actually putting a t-shirt onto your student and looking at the behavior as opposed to just labeling the student. Again, it sort of fits under that same category. So what Jo would say is that there are 4 types of t-shirts that students generally work or wear at any particular time. The first one is the help me. Now, the help me's behave in a certain way because they don't know how to articulate exactly what it is that's happening. Now, the thing about the help me's, and I used to have a young student who I used to work with here, and there was all sorts of things that were going on at home around some domestic violence and other bits and pieces like that. Now, what actually happening is they were behaving in a certain way that was hopefully resulting in them being kept in after school for what was an after school detention equivalent. And the reason why, once we started to dig into this, the reason why is that they were avoiding going home. They were avoiding creating, going into an environment they didn't want to be in. So what actually happened is they didn't have the words to be able to explain what was happening. So therefore they were behaving in a way. And when we really unpack that, they were sitting in that category of help me. Second t-shirt. Second t-shirt is the look at me's. The look at me's. And I'm sure that when we put that one on there, so I can just about hear people through the computer screen saying, oh, yes, I remember that student. Oh, yes, you know, the way that she behaves or whatever else it may be. The look at me's are those attention-seeking missiles that get launched into your classroom. And the look at me's are the kids that make me limbic. They're the kids that make me a little bit emotional when we're in the classroom. Now, the thing that we need to pick up on about the look at me's is that they have a currency, and their currency is eyeballs. So what they want is to have eyeballs on them. And the thing that they get when they're in the classroom is they get the opportunity for 25 plus sets of eyeballs at any one time to be on them. So their behavior needs to be responded to in the same type of way. So if they're asking for eyeballs on them, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we repay them in the same currency. But what we need to do is we need to give them the minimal amount of return on investment. So if a student is making all sorts of scenes, is behaving in a certain way, looking for that attention, what we need to do is to repay them by not ignoring them. Because if we ignore them, what will happen is the behavior will escalate. But rather what we want to do is just give them the minimal amount of response back. And it can be some of those preset words that are loaded into our neocortex that I touched on earlier. So things like, I can't talk to people who are yelling out, but I can talk to Johnny who's got his hand up. Sounds a bit boring, sounds a bit mundane. But if we repeat that, what I'm doing is for the look at me's, I'm giving them a return on their investment that is so little that hopefully what they'll start to do is to modify their behavior, and what they'll start to do is actually change their ways. The important things about the look at me, and I've got a graph here that I'm just going to quickly touch on. As you can see up the side there with the behaviour scale, we've got some behaviours that are operating at about an 8 at this stage. Now, down the bottom is the time. The important thing is here, if we're saying that some of these behaviours that we're seeing in our class are operating at around about an 8, if I put together a well-researched, well-thought-out strategy, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with this behaviour. Now, I've got a couple of options here. If I'm going to ignore this behaviour, first of all, the red line's probably going to happen. I'm probably going to get an escalation in behaviour if I ignore the behaviour. It will go from about an 8 to a 9, 9.5. Now, if I put in together a well-thought-out strategy, what will actually happen is the chances are that initially, I actually might see an increase in the severity of that behaviour to about this point here, that second star. Now, at that second star, a couple of things are going to happen for me. If I don't get limbic, if I stay with the neocortex, if I stay with this strategy, what will happen is that if I give up, if I say I tried it and it didn't work, I'm either going to get a reduction back to where I started, so this purple line here, and I'm going to get across along there, or the second thing that I'm going to get is I've just shown that student a whole new level of behaviour, and I've now shown them how to go up to a 9. But if I stick with my strategy at this stage, what will slowly start to happen is I'll slowly start to get an improvement or a decrease in the severity of that behaviour to about a 6. Now, it's important to know that no strategies I'm using will go back to a 0. Can you see how there is nothing there that's going to take that behaviour right off the scale and get me back to a 0? So what I'm looking for is a decrease in severity and a decrease in frequency of the behaviour. Now, if I pick that one target behaviour and I use a clear strategy to get that improvement, what will happen at about this time here is that I'll start to see a bit of a flat line again at about a 6. So I've taken the severity, I've taken the frequency, and I've said, right, for me, that's a success. There's been a decrease in both. Now, at about this point here, which might be about day 3, what I'm then going to start to do is introduce, I guess, a second target behaviour that I'm going to focus on. And this goes back to that slide of chasing 2 rabbits. It's important that we only chase one behaviour at a time. And when we get a decrease in severity and we get a decrease in frequency, that's when we start to really target those second, third, and fourth behaviours. It's important to note that is only ever going to get us down to about a 6. We're not ever going to get to that 0 that we sometimes want or sometimes we hope to achieve. But really, it's about using that really clear strategy to be able to focus on a way forward. All right, third T-shirt. The Make Me's. The Make Me's are motivated by power. They're quite organised with their work and they understand the context. The important thing about the Make Me's is they've got their little motto, and their motto is, you can't make me, I'm not your mother. Now, you're right, we're not their mother, but what we can show them is so much care and understanding that we want to hold them accountable for the behaviours. And the comment that I'd often throw back to the Make Me's, these are the kids that put their feet up on the desk, and you go, get your feet off the desk, and they say, make me. What we can do there is 2 options. Either one is that we can get into that argument or that tennis match with them. I said, get your feet off the table or else you'll stay back lunchtime. I don't care. And what we do is we start to escalate. These students lose track of what they're actually fighting about. And what they do is they just like the battle in itself. So what we need to do is show high care. I can't make you, but I am willing to spend so much, it would be something along the lines of, you're right, I can't make you, but I care about you that much that I'm willing to help you get your work done at the end of class. So I'm happy to help you at recess. So what we do is we show high care and high compassion for these students. And what will happen is we get off the tennis court with them because they like to go that backwards and forwards with us. And the last one is the yield pays. Now, I think the important thing with the yield pays is that quite often we're talking about kids who have faced some significant trauma in their lives. And they might be a little bit vindictive with some of their behaviour. And I think at this point, it's important to say that we often need outside agencies to come in and support us. And the yield pays are definitely the type of students who we need that external support from there. So we need to take our teacher hat off and we need to make sure that we're supporting our kids in a different way to the other 3 T-shirts. Now, I know that at any one stage, a student can wear multiple T-shirts. I know that at any one point in a class, we might have multiple students with multiple T-shirts on. And I understand that. But if we can just take the advice or take the learning or take the understanding that if I can find out what it is that what T-shirt this student's wearing, do I give myself a better chance of succeeding? Do I give myself a better insight to be able to support a strategy or a process to be able to get some improvement there that maybe I previously wouldn't have been able to do if I've just put a label on the student? All right, our sort of getting towards the end of the presentation today. Our last little part here comes from some work of Darren Hill. Hill's model looks at two aspects. He talks about trust and he talks about conflict. Now, what he will tell us is that when we've got high trust, we have low conflict, and when we have, and vice versa. But what we often do under this model is this sort of really unpacks it in a nice, simple way for me, is that what often we do is that we focus on this top section here when we haven't got the high trust in place, and we focus on our traits or our values. And I think the mistake that we make is in schools, we start too broad. So what we need to do is we often talk about respect. I need more respect. I need more responsibility. But if I was to go back and speak to the students on that level of what is respect, what we generally find is that we've got a difference in terms of understanding of what the word respect actually means. There may be some similarities, but quite often it's not 100% clear. So what we need to do is we need to include two more steps along the way. One is context behaviours, and the second is content behaviours. So if we were to start at the content behaviours, what we're talking about here are really specific, descriptive examples of behaviours that we want to see. Now, when we unpack that, and I'll take an example shortly, and then we can actually group some of those content behaviours together. What we actually then arrive at is what we call context behaviours. Now, when we get to the context behaviours, that's a group of behaviours that we can now start to talk about or classify into a little chunk of behaviours that will then allow us to move towards talking about what these traits or values actually are. Now, when we get to this level here, what we're talking about is having higher trust. So when we've got that low trust at the start and the conflict, high conflict, then what we need to do is talk to the content behaviours. The content behaviours, and the best example we can give is, and I think parents do an exceptionally good job at this, very early when we're training our young kids to get themselves sorted for that bedtime process and routine that we go through. Quite often what we do is we talk to the content behaviours. What I need you to do is to go and get your pajamas on. What I need you to do is to go and clean your teeth, go and get your reader, and to do 3 or 4 content related things. So really specific. Then only at that stage, once we've taught those content behaviours really explicitly, what we can then move is to the context behaviours. And the context behaviours talk to the bedtime routine. And when we're talking to the bedtime routine, we don't have to go through every individual behaviour, but what we can actually say is, right, it's bedtime, go and get sorted for night time, go and get sorted ready for bed, whatever else it may be. And then only after we've taught all of those context behaviours can we move to the traits or the values, and that might be something along the lines of responsibility. So if we've got a different type of arrangement home, we're out or whatever else it may be, I just need you to be responsible for bedtime tonight. So it's about building from content through to context and to traits. And again, I apply that to some of the classes that we have and take a numeracy lesson. If we start with our content behaviours, what are the really specific things that I need for that numeracy lesson? Graph paper, pencil, paper, whatever else it may be. Then what we can do is we can start to classify chunk behaviours into context. I need you to bring along your stuff for numeracy. And then only at that stage can we get to the point of talking about that trait or that value of responsibility. So it's important to note that as we build that conflict, as the conflict decreases, the trust builds. And ultimately what we're on about is building a high level of trust across our classrooms. All right, so just before we finish up, I'm just going to go with one last tip. And tip number 3 is fight your first impulse and listen. Quite often what happens, and now is going to be more relevant than ever before, when our families respond to some of the challenges that they've got, when we get back to, I guess, classrooms as they normally should be, that there's going to be a bit of a hangover from a number of the things that have occurred to families, e.g. loss of income, loss of jobs, all sorts of extra stresses. And what will happen is that quite often when our families and our students and our parents in particular come in and they are a little bit worked up, that they're going to be using their limbic system. And what I'm going to say is that at times when we're responding to some of these types of issues, what we need to do is just to let them go, to listen to what's actually happening. What I'm asking for here is what's the language behind the language? Because quite often we try to get in and resolve, we try to get in and fix. The 3 steps that I've got around tip number 3, around fighting your first impulse and listening, is number 1, just survive the heat. So just sit back and let them get it off their chest. That's the most important thing for them at that point, is to be heard. So what they want to do is they want to be able to just talk and talk and talk. And I'm going to say, that's okay. You don't have to butt in. You don't have to give a solution. People just need to be heard. So survive the heat. When you do get the chance to talk, number 2 is speak with a future focus. What are we actually going to do in the future? Let's get ourselves out of the past. Let's get ourselves worrying about what happened. Let's get ourselves worrying about that particular incident or that situation. But the third part is that somewhere along that future focus, we do need to acknowledge the past, but don't dwell on it. Don't spend our time in there. So the important thing with tip number 3 is fight your first impulse. Listen to what people have got to say and let them get it off their chest. And when we do that, I think, again, we give ourselves the best possible chance of succeeding around some of these behaviours that may present. All right. Very mindful that for the last 45 minutes there, I've hit you with a whole heap of different slides, and hopefully from that, you'll actually get a couple of tips that you'll be able to sort of take and put into your tool belt. If you want to hear a little bit more, if you want to find out anything else, 1, about today's presentation, or 2, about, I guess, anything that sits around this work, then feel free to reach out, either 1, directly to me, simon@realschools.com.au. There's my mobile number there too as well. So the other thing I want to just draw your attention to is that you will have seen Adam post throughout the webinar a whole heap of different webinars that are coming up. Adam's on tomorrow, Amy on tomorrow, sorry. So that'll be good if you can look to find another webinar that suits your needs. Apart from that, I want to wish you all the best during this really challenging time. And next time I'll be on will be Thursday, and would love to see you then. Alrighty, thank you and have a great day. Goodbye.